The title, we're calling this the Manual Labor of Zen Training. And that's a title that comes out of a video course I created several years ago. And it was a wonderful project, but it came out of two things. One was the realization that learning to effectively split firewood is one of the best methods for teaching people how to sit our style of Zazen. There's a certain relaxation combined with a certain strength, combined with a way of using your breath that all goes into sort of a almost mystic quality when a piece of wood is split properly. And it's no different than what I expect to create sitting on a cushion. So that was one thing, manual labor. And we use firewood here. We've got stoves all over the place. We've got a bread oven that uses wood. We've got an outdoor bath that uses wood. We've got a ceramics kiln that uses wood. We have a need for a lot of firewood. The other thing was looking around at the world of Zen as it's discussed in mainland United States. There's times I felt that it had sort of a there was a feeling of sort of, I don't know what to call it, saintliness to it. It's like Buddhism is good because it is compassionate. And let me show you how compassionate I am. And there's just certain ways in which there's a tone of voice, there's a tone of writing that doesn't match me. That I like things practical. I like things that work. I like to figure out how to make things work better. And what was missing was a sense in which Zen actually is physical work, both at its beginning level and also at its highest levels. And I wanted to sort of bring that into a broader conversation with people. So that's where we get the title. So first, what is this manual labor? When I tell you manual labor, what am I talking about? I'm using my breath, I'm using my body, I'm using my senses to do some work. There's something I want to accomplish. And those are the tools that I have available to me to accomplish it. In the case of Zen, the work is you're trying to resolve duality. And we can talk about that another time, but just a sense of self and other, up and down, right and wrong, life and death. There's no end to the dualities that we create. So from my perspective, the purpose of the work of Zen training is to resolve duality. So then there's the second phrase, the Zen training part of the title of this. What is Zen training? And for the purposes of this talk, I found it useful to think about it sort of in 4 phases. And I'm going to describe them. I'm going to sort of add a little bit of perspective on that. And then I'm going to tell some stories that I hope illustrate each of those phases. So you get sort of a stronger taste of it. So just to outline the 4 phases, as you might imagine, there's beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then we can call it lifelong, or after you have resolved your koans and someone has put a stamp on you as a teacher. And in the beginning phase, what we're doing is we're doing a lot of repetition in our body, in our breath, in our senses. And it's a fairly gradual, step-by-step progression in terms of how those things start to refine, how those things start to work for you. That's at the phase 1. Phase 2, now you take that body, you take that breath, you take those senses, and you want to challenge it. You sort of put yourself into some situations where you're testing how well those things start to hold up. And when you can crack through one of those challenges, there can be an additional realization about how your body works, how your breath works. So I'm calling that phase 2. Phase 3, it gets more serious. And this is hard to talk about sort of in public when we talk about Zen training. But ultimately, Zen training has a phase where you are facing death. And we can talk about the death of what, perhaps another time, but it's literally a sensation in which you are willing to risk everything, that you are going to proceed no matter what the consequences are. And that's what I'm calling phase 3. Now, if you crack through that phase 3 and resolve that duality, then at phase 4, now you have a life that you live, but you still have a body, you still have breath, you still have your senses. And so that's how I'm going to sort of talk about each one of those phases in terms of what we're doing. But I want to say a little bit more about the body sitting right here, your body sitting right there, as it is right now, right now. This is our instrument of training. This is what we've got. This is if we're going to do Zen training, this is what we got. And what we need to acknowledge, all of us, is that we've got limitations. When we talk about the me that's inside my skin, there are a lot of limitations. I've got, the lifetime of injuries and responses to injury, neuromuscular habits. There's those limitations. I turn my head more easily to the left than I do to the right. Okay, it should be symmetric, but it's not. Things like our flexibility, our ability to move. I'm starting to look like a older guy than I once was. If you see me moving, so sometimes you're watching somebody from a distance and you have no idea who it is, but you've got some idea of their age by just watching their movement. Okay, that's a limitation. There's how well we can sense gravity in our body. That has to do with our flexibility and our state of relaxation and how our relaxation is. But gravity is a big tool to be used as you're developing your breath and your posture. Our ability to use our senses. Our senses are not sort of just a fixed, instrument. People train their hearing, they train their sense of taste, they train their sense of touch, but still in each of those things that there's limitations. So here's the instrument of training, and it's got lots of limitations. Now, it's worth working on this limited, flawed instrument for a number of reasons. One is that you start just to develop the habit of training, just like the way we have a habit of how you brush your teeth, how you first drink your coffee in the morning. Having habits of training are really useful. Out of those habits of training, you start to develop experiences of concentration that may be ones you haven't experienced in any other context or haven't been aware of in any other context. But there's just ways in which when your body starts to lock in on something, there's a form of focus, there's a form of concentration that is really useful in Zen training. There is, I don't know what to call them other than just sort of moments of breakthrough when you're doing your training, or maybe you're not even doing your training, but something happens when you get a completely different sensation of what's possible in your breath, what's possible in your body. And they are so clear, they are so visceral. I can describe a shout that I did when I was extremely angry at someone maybe 40 years ago. And so this shout came out of my lower abdomen in ways I had never experienced. I had never experienced my body in this way. And it was like a physical blow. It's like the sound wave knocked this person back. It was so strong. It wasn't just a startle reaction. It was a pressure wave of sound. That's one kind of experience. And then it disappears. It's like if you'd asked me a day later, do that again, no way, I didn't have access to it. But by doing this sort of training with this package, with this instrument, you'll have those moments of breakthrough where something completely unprecedented becomes possible that you didn't realize. You're also gradually, step by step, building sensitivity, you're building strength into this limited body. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because I watched a documentary the other day about the basketball career of Michael Jordan. And I don't know, some of you are old enough to know who that is. It's a basketball player. Gifted athlete, beyond my ability to comprehend how somebody could be that gifted. So there's a tendency in our training where you think that you're working to refine your body a little bit, and then someday you become like Michael Jordan because you've really refined everything, tension, breath. You've cut through all those limitations. And that until you do that, you can't really say much about your Zen training. I'm here to tell you that's not true. That I don't know anybody who has taken, sort of the normal flawed package of neuromuscular habit and limitations and created a Michael Jordan out of themselves. I've simply, maybe it's possible, I've just never seen it. What I have seen is at a certain point, you simply break through what you've been talking about as this instrument of training. You break through these limitations that you thought you were trying to improve incrementally, little bit by little bit by little bit. Suddenly, it's like those limitations no longer are limitations in terms of your ability to use your breath, to use your posture, to do your training. So this is kind of a new articulation for me to try and describe this. And I'm watching your faces, and I want to try just a little bit more to make this more clear, that who you are right now, whatever you feel limitations you have, is possible to explode into resolution of all dualities. So when I emphasize how we train our body, how I train our breath, I don't want people stuck on thinking that's a long process until you become Michael Jordan and then you figure it out. Because by the way, Michael Jordan hasn't resolved duality for all his gifts. He led 6 championship basketball teams. and clearly was in a profound state of samadhi as he did it. But he didn't resolve duality. You can tell that hearing him talk today. There's a phrase in Zen that we use to kind of describe this. Well, I know the other thing I wanted to say about these limitations is that think about how, my primary language is English, and English has a certain structure. It has vocabulary for some things. It doesn't have, like right now, there's a woman here I'm looking named like Kelly, and Kelly's got a certain look on her face, and it's a very distinct look. And I'd love to have one word that describes that particular look on her face. In some languages, I bet they have that word. In English, I'd be fumbling. I'd be digging through all kinds of things. So we sort of accept that our language presents limitations. It defines, in some ways, our relationship to the world. There's a grammatical structure, how do nouns and verbs to relate to each other. How do we indicate the passage of time in a sentence? Use of past tense compared to present tense. Those things are unconsciously defining how we view reality. The same way is that we think that whatever this instrument is, whatever our perception, whatever our experience is of gravity, of starlight, of sound, of smell, we think we're picking up on reality. But we're not. We're really picking up on what our limited instrument can show us. It's like dogs hear sounds that I can't. But Scott can hear sounds that I can't because I've lost a bunch of frequencies. And if I take off my glasses, the world is quite fuzzy. And I might try and convince you that in reality, the world is quite fuzzy. But to you, it's not. Little cats are fuzzy, but rocks are not. I'm not sure I can tell the difference between the fuzziness of a rock and the fuzziness of a cat, right? So the what Zen does with this to describe the beyondness of this limited, bag of flesh and bones. There's a phrase called the swallowing up the waters of the West River. And it comes from a conversation between a famous lay Zen student of 8th century China talking to a Chinese Zen master whose name I will mispronounce, but I'll call him Ma-Tzu. And the way the back and forth went was that the layman Pang said, "What kind of man is he who does not keep company with anything?" He's describing sort of a certain form of lack of attachment. And Matsu's answer was, "I will tell you when you have swallowed up in one gulp all the waters of the West River," and the West River being some river in China full of water. So this phrase it's been passed down through all forms of Zen and martial arts, and people think it's like, well, it's is it metaphorical? Is it allegorical? Is it delusional? What is it? And it really is simply a visceral sensation in which who you are is expanded quite dramatically, far beyond the normal boundaries of your skin. So right now, if we're defining me within the boundaries of my skin, you know, one gulp, I don't know, maybe I could get down a pint if I'm lucky of water. But, you know, I know I couldn't get a quart. I know I couldn't get a gallon. I know I couldn't get a bathtub. I know I couldn't get a river full. So when they talk about swallowing all the waters of the West River, they're talking about a sensation of breaking through all limitations of your body, of your breath, of your posture, of your senses. And that ultimately is what Zen is pointing to. So I'm talking about sort of this gradual improvement. But I'm saying, yes, please do that, because that's how you develop a number of useful qualities in your training. But that's ultimately not the final tool that you're using to resolve duality. Thanks for hanging in with me. Let's see if some stories help this. And I'm going to do a time check here just so I can keep myself on track. So I said that the phase one, or I call it a beginning phase, has a lot of repetition. And in our style of training, all kinds of things can be repeated. So somebody who loves to work with clay and wants to learn ceramics, in our setting, encountering us, we'd say, okay, here's clay, and I'm going to keep giving you clay, and I'm going to set a bowl in front of you that's got a certain size and shape, and I want you to make 1,000 of these. And I don't want you to change it. I don't want you to get creative. I want you to mimic that bowl in front of you 1,000 times. And once you've done that, now maybe we can have a conversation about, what you're doing, but not before that. It wouldn't be like throw one and then I'll come in and correct you. And I'll throw another two and I'll come in and correct you. It's like, no, that's of no use. That serves nothing. That just teaches some ideas in your head. It teaches nothing in your hands. It teaches nothing in your feet. It teaches nothing in your body that's useful in creating a piece of ceramics. Other examples. So I like doing Japanese calligraphy, but our style of training that calligraphy, there's one, master calligrapher whose characters I train with. And I don't just draw one and sort of step back and look at it. Any given encounter with that particular character, or sometimes it's 3 characters in a row, I want to do 1,000 of them. Because again, there's no useful correction that I can make other than through my body. I have to wear through the habits of how I hold a brush in my hand, how I set my body, how my feet hit the ground, how my eyes move or don't move when I'm moving the brush. You can't correct those things from the outside. All you can do is just do an incredible amount of them. If you wanted to come here and learn Zazen, well, I've got plenty of timber. I've got 80 acres of hardwood, and I'd be very happy to set you up with 1,000 logs and split those 1,000 logs. And then we've got some useful conversations about how to sit Zazen. So this phase, you're simply breaking through habit. You're breaking through habit. Your body knows how to split a log. Your body knows how to draw a character. Your body knows how to throw clay into a bowl with a very graceful, beautiful shape. But we've got to get you out of the way of what your body can do. So we do it with repetition. But I also want to say that it's not just mindless repetition. In my lifetime, more than 40 years of training, I've seen people inspired who say, okay, I'm going to stay up all night. I'm going to do this 1,000 times. There has to be a certain quality of attention that goes into each of those repetitions. And it's not a critical judgment. You're not saying, oh, that was good, or that was bad, or that was good, or that was bad, or that's bad, or that's bad. It's just that you are using everything in you to feel what just happened. It's not just numb repetition. There's a search, there's a hunt, there's a hunger to say, what was that? Oh, what was that? Now, what was that? Now, what was that? I call that work because it is work. It's hard work. So that's the beginning phase. Now, in the second phase, this is where you're sort of testing. Okay, how well have I improved? My use of my body, my use of my breath, my use of my senses. And there's a story that's kind of helps illustrate this. And it comes out of Japan. It comes out of a sword tradition where there was a master swordsman who finally was able to retire. And it's just a favorite, it's a favorite form of retirement in the old stories of Japan, where you get a little hut up in the mountains and there's a stream nearby where you can get fresh water and you can gather herbs and vegetables. And sometimes the villagers come up from down below and bring you a little bit of, I don't know what, soybeans or things so you can keep yourself going. So this guy was quite happy, but he was also quite renowned in his day, and that people had really valued him as a teacher. So here comes a young aspiring swordsman, sweating his way up the mountain, looking for this sword master, finds him and says, oh, I want to be your pupil. Will you please teach me? the guy laughs and says, go away. I can't teach you. I've got nothing here to teach with. I'm retired. And so the guy didn't go all the way down the mountain. Instead, he gets ways off and he curls up at the base of a tree and tries to sleep. Goes back the next day. Oh, please, I'll do anything. I want to learn from you. And I think you've heard enough of these kind of stories where this has to happen a bunch of times. And finally the sword master says, oh man, okay, tell you what, here's the deal. I do need wood for my fires, and I do have to, bring water up from the stream. And I do, I have a little garden. I have to keep that, free of weeds, and I protect that from the varmints and all that stuff. So you can do that stuff. And the student sort of, it sounds strange to him, but he says, okay, I'll do that. So day after day, he's just drawing water, splitting wood, tending the garden. He'll sweep out the hut every once in a while. And we can't really put a time frame on this, but at some point the student just thinks, this is I've kind of paid my dues here. It's like, this is pretty much nonsense. I'm not learning anything about being a swordsman. I'm just kind of servant to this guy. What the hell? And so he at some point, he finds the way to tell the teacher that, listen, he really is serious. He really does want to learn swordsmanship. Will you please teach me? And the sword master doesn't say anything. But now what happens is this pupil is doing his daily work, doing his chores. Out of nowhere, the old guy shows up with a stick and just, whacks him on the head, whacks him on the shoulder, whacks him on the butt. And there's no predicting when this will happen. And as you might imagine, this now becomes a pretty heightened sense of anxiety in this student, because it's like he can't do anything to prevent it. He gets sore, he's getting bruised, he's getting pissed off, and he just has no ability to not get whacked. And so this goes on for some time. And it finally gets to the point where it is just so frustrating. It's just so incredibly frustrating. There's just one day where he just loses it. And here's the old guy, kind of kneeling beside the fire. And he's got a little iron pot, probably boiling up some rice or something. And he's just stirring it. And the student looks at him. He looks over to the side, and here's this stick. And he's learned to be pretty careful and quiet, so he's able to get to that stick and pick it up without making a sound. And he gets behind the old Zen guy, the old sword guy, and he's got the stick up, and he says, "Oh man, he's just gonna blast him. He's just not gonna hold anything back." And just as he starts to move, the old guy just sort of takes the lid off the pot and blocks the stick. And that was sufficient to kind of break through the limitations that this student had had for so many years. It's like he didn't have to be told the secret of this guy's swordsmanship. He experienced in his body the secret of this guy's swordsmanship. And so by challenging himself in this way, he had a breakthrough. And boy, we could dig story after story after story from many different settings where this is how the next phase of Zen training works. You're trying to accomplish something, and you're willing to push yourself, including failing sometimes. Actually, my own version of this, I was going to tell this at the end, but I knew I was going to go and do my formal 3 years of monastic training. And I had several months after I quit my job to sort of get my affairs in order before I went. And I was pretty apprehensive because I knew how physically demanding the training was. And so my way to prepare, I could easily laugh now, 36 years later. I was living in Michigan at the time. And at that time, it was pretty cheap. You could get a load of hardwood logs delivered from up north. You could get one flatbed semi with 8-foot hardwood logs for about $800. And I thought, oh yeah, that sounds about right. I ordered a load of logs, and I had a friend who had a farm, and they delivered them there. And I went and bought a used chainsaw and a splitting maul, and I had a bust-up pickup. And I said, okay, I'm just gonna cut up all this wood. I'm gonna split all this wood. People need wood. I'll either give it away or I'll sell it. And that'll be my preparation for going to the temple to train. And I was so bad. I think it was time to get off on my plane. And I think the day I left from the plane, there was still 80% of those logs still sitting there on the ground untouched. And I only got through about 20% of them. And felt ashamed and embarrassed and stupid. But at least I had the right idea. It was sort of, given who I was, that was an impossible, it was an impossible task. But at least it was that kind of challenge to myself, even though I wasn't ready to meet that challenge. So not all these stories have, breakthrough endings. So then we get to phase 3, which is the one where now you're challenged, but you're challenged to such an extent that you're going to risk anything it takes. And you've got whatever breath, whatever strength, whatever sensitivity. Yeah, this isn't good enough, but what the hell? This is all I got. I'm going to go for it. So one story, again, this comes out of the sword tradition, has to do with a father and son. And the father, this is many centuries ago in Japan, the father was a professional burglar. And the son, loved his father and was, respected his talents. But he also saw that his father was getting older, slower, and the son was worried that, he just simply would not be able to continue to burgle. And so to take care of the family, the son figured, well, okay, I'm just going to take up the old man's job, and now it's my turn to do it. And so he went to his father and said that this is what he wanted to do. And he expected to be, praised as a loyal son. But instead, the father just laughed and said, we'll all be dead within the month if you try to become a burglar. You're just not cut out for this. Trust me. And so the son went away. And again, you've heard stories like this where the son he persists. He's just not going to take no for an answer, because this is he thinks this is the only way forward, and he wants the old man to take care of himself. And so he just keeps coming back and says, Dad, I'm ready. Let me try it. Let me do it. And so finally, just to shut him up, the dad says, okay, you think you can do this? So off they go, and there's a merchant's house, and it's nighttime, and they sneak inside, and many times they would have these giant chests, really huge chests for storing all kinds of stuff. But the father pointed to a chest, and he said, I know this guy's a merchant, he's a silk merchant, and that must be where he keeps some of his finest silks. So why don't you open that up and see what you can get out of it? And just as the son opens it up and sort of bends over to bring up some of the cloth, the father pushes him in, and he slams down the lid, and he shuts the iron bolt, the lock. And so the son is obviously trapped now in this chest. And on his way out from the house, the father shouts, says, help, there's a burglar in the house. And he runs off, before he can get caught. And so now the household is upset, and, people are scurrying about looking for this burglar, and they can't find the burglar. But they're not sure what to do. And meanwhile, the son, he's kind of screwed, because he can't get this chest open. And so he scratches on the wooden chest, and he knows how to make the sound like a rat, kind of clawing at the wood. And so there's a maid who comes in the room, and she hears this scratch, and figures, oh no, there's a rat in the chest. And so she opens it up, and just as she opens it up, he jumps out, he blows out her lamp. So now the room is in dark, and he rushes out, and on his way out, through the grounds of this villa, there's a well, and he sees a rock, and he picks up the rock and he dumps it in the well. So there's a big splash. And so now the people they hear the splash and they go, oh, the burglar must have jumped in the well to try and escape. That's the story. I don't know why anybody would think that, but anyway, that's the way the story goes. So they're looking in the well, and the son escapes. And he goes and he finds his father, and he said, oh, you rotten bastard. What the hell were you doing? I could have been killed. You know what happens, when they catch one of us, trying to steal stuff. I'd be dead. And the father said, well, you're here now. You're not dead. Tell me what happened. And so the son described how he made the sound like a rat, and then he blew out the light, blew out the candle from the maid, and then he wanted to throw off. He didn't want people chasing him, so he dumped the rock in the well to divert attention to the well, so people were looking there instead of him, and he got away. And you know how this is going to go. The father just smiled and said, "Now, okay, yeah, you're right. You are ready to be a burglar." Point being is that he didn't know that until he had risked his life. And at that point, he was able to demonstrate all of the instincts and abilities that would be necessary for a successful life as a burglar. And now I'm just kind of imagining that, because I don't think I'd be a very good burglar, but that's the way the story goes. But to put this in a little bit more of sort of a Zen context, how this plays out, I think most of you know our use of koans, which is the Japanese word for sort of a paradoxical story that can't be solved analytically. You can't think your way through to an answer. And there's a famous one from a collection called the Momonkan. And it'd be just simpler for me to read it than to try and let's get to it here. This is case number 5, and it's called Kyogen's Man Up a Tree. So here's a Zen master who says, it's like a man up a tree who hangs from a branch by his mouth. His hands cannot grasp the bough, his feet cannot touch the tree. Another man comes under the tree and asks him the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the west, which is a famous Zen story. It's a famous Zen question. Now, if this guy in the tree doesn't answer, he doesn't meet the needs of the questioner. But if he does answer, he loses his life, because the only thing that's got him up there is hanging onto a branch by his teeth. So the Zen master says, at such a time, how should he answer? Right? If he doesn't open his mouth, he shames a person in need. If he does open his mouth, he falls to a death. Now what? That experience, again, seems ridiculous by almost all standards. You can't imagine your way into that situation. But at a certain point in your training, that becomes what's real. You really have that very, very visceral sensation, or one like that if you do this or you do this, either way is failure or death. What are you going to do? And you can't, in the context of a good teacher, you can't just sit there saying, well, I've got good enough teeth to hang on here for 1,000 years. Zen master will kind of tickle you under the armpit or something. See what happens. So that's what the manual labor is at that level of training. It's fun to watch your faces. I'll get to questions in a minute. So then I said there was a phase 4, which is after you've answered that koan and many others, where you show you have thoroughly resolved the duality. And then what you have is simply a lifetime of freely using your senses, using your body, using your breath in ways that, however, needs to be true at the moment. And so I can laugh at myself thinking of that semi-load of logs 36 years ago, because here I am these days, the last almost 2 months, I've been working on firewood because of all those places we have on this property where we need fire. And we haven't been able to have the usual work crews that come out and train. And when they come out to train, many times the favorite thing is splitting wood. Well, they can't do that, and I can't. I'm not getting any wood, so it's like, okay, Gordon, you're going to do it yourself. And I have been enjoying it in ways. I don't know when I've enjoyed using my body like this so consistently day after day. It has been such a very long time. And yes, I'm aged, and yes, I get sore, and there's dinners where I can't get a fork to my mouth because my arms don't work. But I am so freaking happy just using my body, my breath, my senses the best I can, laying up next winter's firewood. Now, a more serious, perhaps, version of that was after finishing my koan training, I wasn't satisfied that I had been tested far enough. And so that's when I did my chaplain training. And some of you know this story, which I won't recount here, but it was a ferocious 3 months of learning. It was in some ways the most intense 3 months of learning I've ever had in my life, to be trained in the first phase of becoming a hospital chaplain. And kind of by, I don't know what, it wasn't deliberate on my part. I didn't go into that training with a plan of how to do it effectively. But given the physical demands of the work and the difficulty of facing so much suffering, I went right back to my breath and my posture. Sort of the very basics of my training is, how can I use my breath and my posture and my senses to take care of people as a chaplain? And it was a profound experience for me. I went into it with the question of what is healing. That was sort of the koan that I had posed for myself, because there's so much of spiritual angst. So many things don't get healed in the way we normally think of healing, with antibiotics or procedures or surgery. But through breath and posture, I was able to find that. But it was work. So not only do I talk about the manual labor of Zen training, I've also written about the manual labor of chaplaincy, because to me, thinking of it in the context of hard manual work, for me, because it makes it much more effective in taking care of people. So that's what I prepared for tonight. Those steps 1, 2, 3, 4, with a few stories thrown in. And we've got maybe 10 minutes for questions. That's less than I wanted to do, but what comes to mind for you?